The next question, and to some degree you already have discussed this, Mr. Walsh. In the last 10 years, New Jersey has gone from 1.5% renewables to 2.4%. On the other hand, California has reached 30% renewables with aggressive targets for growth of renewables. Renewables must be ramped up to reach the current target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 80% of the 2006 levels by 2050, or any proposed targets of reaching 100% renewable electricity generation. The question, and I'm going to start with you first, Mr. Walsh, how fast can we ramp up renewables, and what are the most important issues affecting how fast we can go?
I think something that's really important to remember here is we're talking about technologies that were developed in the 70s. You know, there's a big conversation about transitioning our shipping industry to cleaner energy. It used to be run entirely on wind. You know, these technologies exist, right? And so, you know, we can do this. The biggest barriers we have are political barriers. The biggest hurdles we have to get over is our own imagination. There are concrete policies that we can implement in the state that will help us get there. We believe that setting a vision for where we need to be is what we need to be. We need to be talking about where we need to be and how we get there, and really setting that. And I think there's some concrete policies that can help us get there. One is improving the renewable portfolio standard in the state. It's moving up to 50. We need to move it to 100%. We need to fix the definition and get the dirty stuff out so we're not considering dirty energy as clean energy. We need to fix net metering policies in the state. Net metering has been one of the most effective tools that we've used to actually fund renewable energy, particularly solar and distributed solar. Right now we have a cap on net metering that every couple of years they tweak it and adjust the cap up a little bit. Assemblyman McKeon has a bill that would actually eliminate the cap on net metering, and it would ensure that residents are paid the retail rate for energy. And so net metering, for people who don't know, it's essentially if you have solar panels on your house, any excess energy that you sell into the grid, you're able to get paid back for, is the idea of net metering. In New Jersey, you essentially can get reimbursed up to the amount that you generate or that you use, and we would like to see that increased. In Colorado, they're actually talking about a policy called Equitable Net Metering, where you're reimbursed at the retail rate for up to 120% of the energy that you use versus generate. So if you generate over up to 120% of what you use. And then anything beyond that would actually go into a fund to fund renewable energy development in low-income communities for any energy that was brought into the grid at that point. We need to eliminate loopholes in the renewable portfolio standard. The legislature moved to remove RECs, renewable energy credits, which are essentially this shell game of offsets when you're talking about unbundled RECs, and they essentially allow utilities to act like they're building new renewable energy by buying credits elsewhere. They do provide some financing for renewables, but they're really not an effective tool for financing or really accounting for renewable energy generation. They also have alternative compliance payments, and one of the things that this bill did is it lowered the amount that utilities have to pay for alternative compliance payments. That means you don't meet your renewable goals, you can actually just pay a fee in order to get better, to get out of meeting your renewable energy standards to the state. And so rather than actually setting some sort of fee like that, we think that utilities should be fined at 2 times the cost of meeting those standards that they would have had to have met if they didn't meet them. And then that money should be used to fund and provide resources to offset the cost of renewable energy development, primarily in low-income communities, and to generate resources to help make that happen. I can imagine if utilities were forced to do something and they were forced looking at having to pay 2 times as much as what it would cost to do it, that they would probably just do it, and particularly if they couldn't pass those costs on to ratepayers. So those are a few things that we would like to see if they couldn't pass it on to ratepayers. That's a few things we'd like to see happen. Thank you.
Ms. Garan, how fast can we ramp up renewables? And what are some of the issues?
Ramp up renewables, that's also an economic matter, and that's
The mic?
yeah. And so, oh, I'm sorry. It's an
Go ahead.
okay. Sorry, I thought I'm loud, but while we're considering, large, high percent, 100% renewable energy, well, also we have to consider that distributed energy generation is really important from clean energy, sources and microgrids, and so these are important matters while we're transitioning for tomorrow. So implementing microgrid approach, and so moderning, reliability is very important. Meanwhile, we're talking about clean energy, but also let's keep in mind, in addition to sustainability, we have to be resilient for any catastrophes of the future. It could be an environmental catastrophe, it will be economic catastrophe, it will be social catastrophe. So let's keep in mind that resiliency always we have to be in our mind while we're trying to achieve those large goals seriously. And so definitely we need to modernize our systems, our infrastructure, not only for energy but also in our lives. So that I can say that in addition to what has been said already.
Mr. Lawton, how fast do you think we can ramp up, and what are some of the issues impeding it?
How fast we can ramp up, I think, depends on a couple things. Actually, three areas. One is the technological advances, second, market signals, and third, policy. I think the one that, for me, is least problematic is probably technology. We're making a lot of advances. A lot of the technology exists already. There are a lot more advances we can make. I think the two areas that are slowing us down the most, that if we could address those could help speed up our progress, would be in the market signals that influence business strategy and profits. All businesses, they do have to listen to consumers, and they have to listen to their investors. And I think of one analogy is, how many people here are willing to pay a bit of a premium to buy their produce that's locally produced, locally grown, and organic? Most people are, up to a certain point, if you can afford it. Also, you mentioned I also drive a Prius. I paid a bit of a premium to buy a Prius instead of a conventional car. I get over 50 miles per gallon. I should ride my bike more and all that, so I'm not a purist, but I mean, it makes a difference. So consumers more and more are sending market signals that they're willing to recognize that there are costs that are important to them that are not reflected in prices of conventional products that are, produced using fossil fuels. So that's a market signal that, companies should pay attention to. I read in the paper this morning, New York Times, I can't remember the name of the company, it's a large energy company, fossil fuel based, that they made a tremendous investment in buying a couple of companies for renewables. So that they're moving where the market is. So that's one thing, that's consumer demand. The second is investors. There's a big movement in terms of, all these institutional investors that manage big blocks of financial capital that companies need. Recently, the BlackRock CEO, I don't remember his name, but the CEO of BlackRock, one of the largest, if not the largest, investment companies, sent a letter to all the CEOs of companies that they invest in saying, our investment philosophy, our investment decisions will be guided by, we'll be targeting our financial capital to those companies who see profit as not their only or primary goal, who see, making a social impact, a positive social impact. That's where we'll start targeting our investments. CalPERS is the largest public pension fund in the company, California Public Pension Fund. They are very clear about how they store the trillions of dollars in their portfolio toward businesses that will be there for their pensioners. So they really focus on sustainability as a real influence. So those are really powerful signals from both consumers and investors. So all of us, that means all of us can have an influence, and the companies will respond. Third area is policy, and it's been alluded to already. I would say that one is we need to address a market failure, what economists call a market failure. If all prices that we look at, we all make decisions based on what something costs us. It's assumed in a perfect market that prices reflect all costs. That's not the case, especially when it comes to energy. If you look at carbon or fossil fuels, that's really severely underpriced because it doesn't include the cost of all the asthma, all the health costs, all climate change. Those are real costs that are not included in the price of fossil fuels. So if you're looking at making a decision on whether to purchase fossil fuel-based fuel or solar or wind, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. So policy is really critical to address that, what economists call a market failure. So we're making intelligent decisions about, pricing. Real quickly, the next one is corporate governance structure. There's a fairly new corporate governance structure called the benefit corporation. I think over 34 states now have legislation where a company can incorporate as a benefit corporation. And what that means is instead of the board being sued by their investors for not maximizing profits, a benefit corporation actually is committed to a triple bottom line way of doing business. They don't only define success based on financial metrics, but they also define success based on social and environmental impact metrics too, and they're held accountable for that.
I'm going to do that.
Huh?
I'm going to do that.
That's great. All right, good. So there's benefit corporations and also certified B corporation. And lastly, I would say one thing that would really make a huge difference is a much more engaged citizenry. The most active political people right now, the people in organizations that are the most active are the most affluent people, citizens, and also those organizations that have the greatest degree of economic power. Those people who are lower income and smaller businesses are not as engaged as citizens, and you can see just from in terms of lobbying power. So I think one huge difference would be if, we mentioned coalitions several times, we're also a member of the coalition, Jersey Renews Coalition, like-minded individuals, citizens, and organizations and businesses need to organize and form coalitions to act as a counterweight to the dominant business presence that influences our policy today.
Thank you. Mr. Fatton, would you please follow up on that?
Yeah, so, sure. Well, to answer the initial question about considerations, I think we've talked about cost, and I think that we shouldn't gloss that over. So there are big, powerful organizations that are going to be opposed to anything on clean energy goals, and primarily the argument is going to be about cost, and I think we need to be considerate of it, not just because big energy users like manufacturing facilities might be impacted, but also because those same low-income people, those same environmental justice communities who are suffering from the impacts of fossil fuel use are also the ones who are the least able to absorb an increase in their energy prices. Sure, I want to buy local and organic, and I want to drive a hybrid, and I want to maybe even choose to purchase clean energy, but I'm not representative, and I think that we need to be really thoughtful about what the impact of these will be on low-income communities. And so what are the energy assistance programs? How are they functioning? How are they funded? How do people know about them? I think that's really important consideration. Lyle talked in the very beginning about the option to purchase our power from other states, which is, I think, is in terms of a consideration, sure, we can get to 100%, and we could probably buy 80% of it from other states. We won't get any of the economic development benefits if we do that. It'll be cheaper, but it doesn't mean that you'll have investment in jobs or companies in state. And lastly, I would just say that the last consideration, I think, is as we transition, there are people who are going to be displaced, and it's not sufficient to say we're going to give you a job as a solar installer right now, because when you're making $80,000 a year in a refinery and you have full benefits and you have a nice vacation and you have full benefits, and then you go to a job, and I'm not casting aspersions on someone, but I think they're not comparable right now. You go into renewable energy and you're going to make, let's say, $10 to $20 an hour, or you're doing energy efficiency upgrades, same dynamic exists. You can't just transition people from very high paying jobs in the fossil fuel industry and say, well, we're going to give you a job over here in the renewable sector that really is not comparable. So we have to lift, and the solution there is to make the renewable side and the energy efficiency side better paying, more family sustaining in terms of the wages and benefits that get accrued, so that when people do get displaced, because eventually they will, it's not as hard of an impact.
Mr. Rawlings, how fast can we ramp up, and what will be the issues impeding it?
Well, Dan just mentioned we want to raise the salaries of the renewable energy workers. Well, that's going to make the renewable energy more expensive. So there's a lot of push-pull here between the things that we want and these goals. I think the bottom line is how fast can we do it? Not as fast as we'd like. It'd be great if we could say, well, we want it to happen in 10 years by 2030. And it's 10 years because it would take 2 years to get the programs in place, and then it's 2020, and you got 10 years to do it. I'm a scientist, so I can't say anything's for certain, but from the point of view of an engineer who designs and goes out and builds this stuff and understands the costs and where they are going, and also I participate a great deal in the research into the infrastructure we need to handle all this intermittent sun and wind. From that point of view, my statement would be I'm 99% sure we cannot get there by 2030. The good news is we can get there. The technology is here. It's still expensive, let's be honest, but it's getting cheaper. And that infrastructure development, we can get that done if we have enough of a commitment. Several have said the political will is part of the problem, and it's a real problem. We don't have the political will to spend $20 billion in infrastructure right now. We have to develop that over time, develop that political will. Wait until the world starts to take global warming more and more seriously, which it is in the process of doing. But humankind doesn't turn on a dime. The political will has to be developed. The public perception needs to be developed. The technology needs to be developed, and the cost is going to gradually go down over time. So Dan talked about 80% by 2050. My organization had developed a bill 3 years ago requiring 80% by 2050. I can't predict with certainty how far we could get by 2050, but if I were to guess right now, I would say 80% is kind of on the outer edge of what's economically and technically feasible by 2050. We might be able to get to 100% by 2050, which our new governor says he wants to do. I'd say that's a maybe, but that's about where I think we can get to.
Okay.